Part 42. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 413. For Tintin Ji-san, who has just been promoted to become a father, after changing jobs, he will gradually understand the meaning and responsibility of becoming a father. For Tintin Ji-san at this time, it is finally understand the hardships of being a father, and even better understand the difficulties that his father had to take care of himself as a naughty child. Therefore, let Tintin Gaisang be responsible for completing the part about the father in the comic Clannad. The plot not only brings emotions into the process of completion, but also allows you to experience some special meanings from the comics. For the little animals who like Lolita and are easily immersed in the world of cuteness, I was responsible for completing the plots about Eleven and Fengzi in the comic Clannad because of my love for them and because they can't stand the cuteness of Lolita creatures. Attack, so it is quite easy to be immersed in the delusional world of various gentlemen. Therefore, in the process of completing the comic manuscript, the little animal will subconsciously implement the truth of cuteness is justice in every page of the comic under draft. As for Mayuri, although she hasn't shown anything too outstanding, maybe it's because her abilities haven't been awakened yet, or maybe she's not very apt for the manga draft that needs to be completed at the moment, but for every manga draft I'm responsible for, I have to for Mayuri who can conscientiously complete the work, like Tintin Ji-san or Little Animal. Once he encounters a manga manuscript that is highly oriented or has excellent compatibility, he will surely be able to unleash his talent beyond that of ordinary manga artists, right? To put it simply, although the assistant's responsibility is to assist the cartoonist in completing the cartoon manuscript, it is not just like a machine, simply completing the cartoon manuscript, but in the process of completing the cartoon manuscript, every page the comic manuscripts are filled with one's own soul, so that every stroke of the completed comic manuscript can release feelings that can cause effective mental harm to the readers. Liozi, if you plan to follow the path of a rebel like us, you must at least master this skill before leaving. If not, you will not be able to stand on the same stage as us in the future. This is what Takahashi Makoto said when he left Shizukawa alone. Although it was unexpected that Makoto Takahashi would explain these truths seriously, although he could not fully understand what Takahashi Makoto said, and although the content Takahashi Makoto said sounded completely unrelated to himself now, but however, Shizuka can feel that Takahashi Makoto is teaching himself, as a cartoonist, to teach himself who plans to be a cartoonist in the future. After having a private conversation with Makoto Takahashi, Shizuka did not behave too abnormally. The only change may be that Shizuka, who originally rarely spoke in the studio, has become even more taciturn. Looking at the comic manuscript in his hand, Jinghe looked expressionless as usual, without making any comments, but the fluctuation in his eyes meant that Jinghe's heart was not as calm as usual at this moment. Okazaki Tomoya, who is heading towards the route of good father, takes Shio to visit his father who has been released from prison for the first time. Okazaki Tomoya, who learned about his father's past from Okazaki Fino, did not truly understand his father's past until this moment. It was not easy to truly forgive my father's past behavior and irresponsible attitude from the bottom of my heart. Especially the father-son dialogue between Okazaki Tomoya and Okazaki Nayuki. On one side, Okazaki Tomoya cares about his father and hopes that Okazaki Nayuki will pay attention to his health and smoke less and drink less. On the other side, this is the young Okazaki Nayuki, caressing the young man. Young Okazaki Tomoya's head teaches his children to be obedient and not to eat too many snacks. In the manga, it is described in a crazy way through comparison, and the kind of it is not easy to understand that being a father until you become a father, the emotions, as well as the emotion of only when you raise a child will you know the kindness of your parents, are vividly depicted, making the original simple comic plot and tear-jerking ability instantly reach the level of cruel. Whether it is the depiction of details in the comics, the processing of light and dark lights in the comics, or the processing of the expressions of the characters in the comics, as well as the understanding of the role of the father in the comics, It is just as the Phoenix Academy teacher said, you can feel the emotion filled by Uncle Tintin from every page of the comics. Well, Mr. Jinghee, are there any problems with the comic drafts I have completed? Uncle Ding Ding felt a little stressed at the moment. Although it is Jinghee who is currently observing the manga draft as his assistant, but having Jinghee stare at me for a long time without saying a word like this to complete the manga, even though he knows that usually Jinghee is the kind of quiet beauty who is silent and rarely speaks. Man, Uncle Tintin still feels a lot of pressure. No, there's no problem. Jinghee, who was awakened from his thoughts by Uncle Ding Ding's uncalm remarks, realized that he was losing his temper, sorted out the comic manuscripts in his hands, and then picked up another thick stack of books from the desk. He handed the thick comic manuscript to Uncle Tintin and said without changing his expression, "This is the comic manuscript that the Phoenix Academy teacher completed before. Uncle Tintin, please." Hey, what's going on with this number? Ding Ding looked at the comic manuscripts that were more than he had completed before, and he smiled horribly. The content of the chapter I completed before, if it were serialized as a monthly, it should be enough to say. Well, this is the content that follows. Jinghee didn't wait for Uncle Ding Ding to finish complaining, pointed to another pile of comic manuscripts piled on the table, and said calmly, "These are all things that Sister Quay has not finished yet." It turns out that Zyakui needs to complete a lot, seeing that the number of comic manuscripts piled up on the table was almost the same as what he had in his hand. Uncle Ding Ding felt a little more balanced, but Ding Ding immediately noticed something was wrong. No, wait. Why are there so many comic manuscripts piled up? Are there a lot? These comic manuscripts. Jinghee's eyes lingered between the comic manuscripts in Ding Ding's hands and the comic manuscripts on the table for a moment, then he said in a rather unexpected tone, "These comic manuscripts were published by Uncle Tintin before. When you were on vacation, I completed it with the teacher from Phoenix Academy. Maybe it's because you haven't worked for a long time, Uncle Tintin, that's why you think there are so many comic manuscripts." Sorry. After Ding Ding was silent for a moment, he squeezed out two words through his teeth with some difficulty. Putting the comic manuscript in his hand back on his desk, Ding Ding returned to Jinghee, put his hands together and said apologetically, "Jinghee-kun, the previous time was not because we planned to abandon you, but because you were Cheng specifically named us to be responsible for helping, so you, being resentful, would use us as the target of revenge. This is wrong." Resentment? Revenge? Jinghee looked at Uncle Ding Ding, who looked miserable with some doubts, and replied with some incomprehension, "In the past 3 months, although I was not able to have a good rest like Uncle Ding Ding, even under the leadership of the Phoenix Academy teacher, I lost track of time and completed the manga draft, but I also learned a lot from it. How could I feel resentful and revengeful towards you or Sister Quay because of that incident? But these comic manuscripts." Seeing that Jinghee did not find the key to the problem, but said these words calmly with an innocent look, Ding Ding's heart collapsed at this moment. "Okay, I know this matter has nothing to do with you. Everything was indeed instigated by that guy Aiken, right? Aiken left you alone last night. In fact, it was a deliberate plan to indirectly retaliate against us through you. No, Phoenix Academy teacher kept me here last night, actually because." Jinghee looked at Ding Ding, who seemed to have misunderstood something, and was about to tell everything about what happened last night, but he had already entered the Honkai route. Uncle Ding Ding, however, somewhat directly interrupted Jinghee's explanation. "Divorce plots and borrowed knives to kill, although he has a different understanding of common sense than ordinary people, that guy Aiken has an extraordinary talent in this area. It is true that it is because his way of thinking is different from ordinary people. Is it going to be like this?" Ding Ding couldn't listen to any explanation. After muttering in a low voice, he turned his eyes to Jinghee, who looked awkward and hesitated. "Hey, Jinghee, we are finishing the comic together. Colleagues, right?" We are comrades fighting together, the kind of partners who can trust each other and trust each other with their lives, right? Yes, yes, although it was not as exaggerated as Uncle Tintin said, he was just a colleague who assisted the cartoonist Phoenix Institute Kuma to complete the manga draft, but looking at Tintin who was crying without tears, Jing-He felt that if he didn't answer like this at this moment, the uncle in front of him might, no, he would definitely burst into tears. Then we should unite and resist the rule of tyrants like Chang, resist the evil vengeful behavior of Aiken, and resist the bad taste of Aiken who likes to watch human beings struggling in darkness. Although the words are very passionate and inflammatory, but speaking of Uncle Ding Ding, do you dare to speak a little louder? If you want to resist His Majesty the fierce Demon King of the Phoenix Academy, plotting something secretly is too petty, right? If you resist the fierce Demon King of the Phoenix Academy, no, if you resist the fierce Master of the Phoenix Academy, your end will definitely be worse than death. Although Jing-He didn't say anything, he cast a sympathetic look at Ding Ding, which was already very painful. Good says it all. Oh, damn it. You are so spineless, Ryoko, Tintin complained angrily, then turned to Miss Aoi Ueno, who had been quietly listening to the conversation between the two, and asked, Aoi-chan, what about you? Weren't you quite dissatisfied with the plot arranged by Aiken? Now it's time to take revenge on Aiken and get some interest back. I don't want it, Miss Aoi Ueno decisively shook her head. If he shows any hostility toward Cheng at this moment, even just a little bit, that guy Cheng will definitely lead the plot of the comic Clannad to a sad and tear-jerking route. Don't say that Cheng won't do this, Uncle Ding Ding. Do you think there is anything that Cheng, who can draw Nagisa to death, doesn't dare to do or can't do? But Tintin did not give up and once again tried to persuade Ueno Aoi to join the assistant counterattack cartoonist camp. Besides, now that I can draw the cute Chio-chan and the cute Fuko-chan, I'm already satisfied. Miss Aoi Ueno held the manga manuscript in her hand and looked at the pile of her own on the table with great joy. After finishing the manga manuscript, he asked Shizu, who had entered the quiet and beautiful man mode, Jing-He-kun, do I need to complete these manga manuscripts? Are they all Shio-chan's plot? Well, although the number is a bit too much. In view of the previous experience of Tintin, Jing-He River kindly reminded him, but a lot of numbers? That's great. No, if I endure multiple mo killing in one day, I can't bear it. Ueno Aoi quickly flipped through the comic manuscripts on the table, smiling happily, but if I die because of this, it might be a very happy thing. It's so happy to be able to draw the comic Clannad. This is probably what Mr. Feng Guangai said. Looking at the two colleagues who performed in completely opposite ways, Jing-He River lowered his head thoughtfully and muttered to himself, complete the comic with emotion, right? Speaking of Miss Ueno Aoi, it's okay. Uncle Tintin completed the comic manuscript with hatred and anger, right? Yesterday, I apologized because I was too tired to go home and wanted to rest, so fell asleep. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 414. Although Takahashi Makoto previously distributed different manga manuscripts to the assistant side based on the characteristics of the assistant side, this division is not absolute. Just like the comic manuscript that Tintin will start to complete, although judging from the content of the comic, most of the plots involving 11 should be completed by Miss Aoi Ueno, they are in Tintin's hands at the moment. The assistants all have different habits when completing the comic draft. For example, Miss Aoi Ueno prefers to finish all the manga manuscripts in her hand, organize them in order, and then silently observe the comics while drinking black tea or coffee, but, Miss Aoi Ueno seems to be doing it again recently. The new habit of rubbing the comic manuscript with your face has been added. But Uncle Tintin likes to quickly read through the comic manuscript before completing it, and then start working after he is familiar with the general direction of the comic plot, so that in the process of completing the comic manuscript, he can draw when it comes to character expressions and lighting, choose the solution that is most suitable and fits the comic. Although looking at the pile of comic manuscripts in front of him, Tintin felt a little apprehensive. However, Tintin did not complain at all, but followed his usual habit of quickly reading through the comic manuscripts before finishing them. It's not that Tintin doesn't want to complain about the excessive number of comic manuscripts, but complaining to Makoto Takahashi. In fact, Tintin has tried it before, but the result. According to Makoto Takahashi, after all the complaining, the work that needs to be done still needs to be done, so why spend time complaining? If you are still like a child and want to act coquettishly in this way, why not go and inquire about the whereabouts of a certain black organization like a certain death god elementary school student, and look for the drug that can make people smaller? After children complain, they will receive sympathy and mercy from their parents and teachers, and they may even receive unexpected help. But if you, as an adult, start complaining whenever something goes wrong, not only will you not get any sympathy and mercy, but you will also be looked at with ridicule and disdain from the people around you. Maybe your luck will be a little sad. They will also receive special treatment that adds insult to injury. After all, complaining about this kind of behavior, in today's cruel world, it is a privilege that only children have. Although the number of comic manuscripts seems to be large, and the work that needs to be done by assistants also seems to be a lot, if you just observe it, it doesn't take much time. The manga planet in this chapter begins with the happy life between Okazaki Tomoya and Okazaki Shio as their father and daughter. Okazaki Tomoya, who had ignored Shio before, after understanding his responsibility as a father, no longer ran away from the sadness caused by the death of his beloved Furukawa Nagisa, nor did he avoid getting along with Shio. Instead, he dealt with his sadness. Keep the pain in your heart and live a strong life with your daughter. After finishing his busy work every day, Okazaki Tomoya no longer goes to game stores or pubs to kill time. Instead, he rushes to the kindergarten to pick up his daughter as soon as possible after get off work. Although in the comics, Okazaki Tomoya and Shio still live in that small apartment and live a not very wealthy life, Tintin can still feel from the comics that whether it is Okazaki Tomoya or Shio, we are all living happily at the moment. Especially when I saw the scene in the manga where Tomoya Okazaki hummed a song to put 11 to sleep. Although there are only Tomoya Okazaki lying on his side and Shio lying on the bed among the manga manuscripts to be completed, Tintin, who has just become a father, already knows how to complete this page of manga manuscript. How to draw that warm feeling between father and daughter. After all, Tintin's own family just welcomed a little life. Although it feels like there is just one more person, today's lifestyle and concepts are completely different from before. Just like Tomoya Okazaki, who prepares to become a good father in the comics, Uncle Tintin also learned how to take care of children and how to sing them to sleep. Seeing in the comics that Tomoya Okazaki rushes to the kindergarten to pick up Shio after getting off work with sweat all over his face, Tintin rarely gets distracted while observing the comics draft. Maybe Uncle Tintin is also imagining it at this moment. One day in the future, after finishing the day's work, like Okazaki Tomoya, he will run to the kindergarten to pick up his children as soon as possible, right? But as I continued to observe the comics, the originally heartwarming plot of the comics took an unexpected and surprising turn. Just when Okazaki Tomoya began to exercise and prepare to show off his skills in the town's sports meeting, Shio, who had been cheering for his father and looking forward to his father's performance, suddenly fell ill. See here, by that time, Uncle Ding Ding had gradually felt that something was wrong, but the real fatal blow came from the words of the doctor who came to treat 11. 11's current physical condition is the same as that of Nagisa back then, even worse than Nagisa. Although this sentence did not reveal what 11's future will be, but based on the comic manuscript that can be observed in his hand, combined with Makoto Takahashi's past character of tricking people without paying for their lives, Uncle Tintin said that he has seen the ending. According to this pace of development, it is estimated that Eleven's future will be the same as Najus's, which means... how the plot develops. Ding Ding has already quickly flipped through the comic manuscript and is ready to start working in assistant mode, but, it seems that Ding Ding was affected by the plot of the comic, and he did not start working immediately, but fell into a strange silence. Although at the beginning, Ding Ding thought that Jinghe River had divided the comic manuscript incorrectly, but after flipping through the comic manuscript, Ding Ding was sure that the person who needed to complete this part of the comic manuscript was definitely himself, not Miss Wenoaoi, who was rubbing the comic manuscript with her face. Because if Miss Wenoaoi, who was immersed in Chio and Fuko's cute killing world at this moment, observed the comic manuscript in his hand, Ding Ding can use his clone Little Ding Ding as a guarantee. Miss Wenoaoi, who was still giving a gentlemanly silly smile, would definitely enter a furious state, and then use angry fire to burn himself and Takahashi Makoto to death. Tintin finally forced himself to calm down. Although he had started to write, his resentment towards the comics made it difficult for Tintin to get into work as usual. After only a short while of working, Tintin made several mistakes in a row. According to the development of this plot, if I am not mistaken, then the next plot, no way. Such a crazy thing, Ah Cheng really dares to do it. Tintin put down the comic manuscript in his hand and stared at Takahashi Makoto. If he could see Takahashi Makoto's death at this moment, Tintin would definitely kill Takahashi Makoto without hesitation. Oh, this is a look made up of anger and hatred. Takahashi Makoto seemed to notice Uncle Ding Ding staring at him, raised his head and said jokingly, but the only shortcoming is that before he took action, he had already released his murderous intent without reservation. For you, Ding Ding Ji-san, who wanted to assassinate me, this is a fatal flaw. That. Ding Ding stood up and quickly walked to Takahashi Makoto, and after stealing a glance at Miss Wenoaoi, who was concentrating on completing the comic manuscript, he whispered to Takahashi Makoto, "Aiken, tell me honestly, about the ending of Shio, will it be the same as Najus's, that?" Huh? Ding Ding Ji-san, didn't you already know it? Why are you asking me? Takahashi Makoto gave the answer that Ding Ding didn't want to hear the most at the moment with a puzzled look on his face. Huh? It's really this, Uncle Ding Ding, who was originally just suspicious, shouted in surprise after getting the answer he wanted to know. Hey, Chen, you have to know that if this is the case, you... Oh? Ding Ding Ji-san, is it really okay to be so loud now? Takahashi Makoto pointed his finger at Wenoaoi, who noticed the abnormal situation here. If the little animals knew this plot, they would go berserk. Although I am quite confident in my martial arts, but you, Ji-san, seem to be doomed. Well, anyway, write a suicide note first. Kai, what a joke. The main culprit who drew this plot is you, the crazy cartoonist Feng Guangai Yuan Kyoma. Although he said so, Ding Ding deliberately lowered his voice. It's because he is guilty, right? Even if I am the main culprit, so what? Takahashi Makoto looked at Uncle Ding Ding with a smile. Ding Ding Ji-san, do you think the angry little animals will be merciful and let you, the collaborator, go? Chen, aren't you afraid that I will risk my life and die with you? Is this a threat? No, it's just the last struggle of ignorant humans. Humph. If you have the awareness that even if you are killed by a small animal, you must die with you, you can ignore my warning, you can even take the initiative to provoke the small animal. After all, if you want to kill someone, you must be prepared to be killed. This is common sense in the world. Gao Chiao Cheng, who has always said that Chen Ben is a four-eyed fox, is more like a fox at this moment. So, Ding Ding Jisan, if you cherish your life, the comic manuscript in your hand must not be observed by small animals. Ah Cheng, don't you worry that if you do this, you will not only have to bear the revenge of Aoi-chan in the future, but also suffer the condemnation of readers. If direct threats don't work, then take a roundabout way to save the country. Ding Ding Jisun has reached the point where he has run out of tricks. Well, the characters in the plot that I gradually like will die as the plot develops. Seeing that Gao Qiaocheng seemed to be a little moved, Ding Ding Jisun ignited the last glimmer of hope, but Gao Qiaocheng's next words shattered this last hope. He, isn't this super loving? You will be punished by God. Ah Cheng, you have such a bad character, you will definitely be punished by God in the future. Seeing that Takahashi Makoto was not moved by soft or hard words, Uncle Ding Ding, knowing that the situation was beyond repair, cursed Takahashi Makoto. Turning the pets that have been carefully taken care of into delicious dishes on the table. Takahashi Makoto stared at Uncle Ding Ding and said the most evil words with a smile, especially at the moment when you kill your own pets with your own hands. The ugly appearance of the human soul struggling and twisting in darkness and light is really a pleasant performance for people to enjoy. And speaking of Ding Ding Ji-san, as a human being, are you really qualified to say such words? Huh. Humans, don't they always repeat such behaviors? Please rest early, dear readers. Thank you for your support, dear readers. So, the long-awaited second update is here, dear readers. Ahem, a certain cat did not use the evil eye, so there is no setting for 1 minute dream, so the second update is not an illusion. It is definitely not an illusion. I don't want you to praise a certain cat, I just want to relieve the guilt in my heart. Well, that's it, dear readers. This is not Tsundere. It's definitely not Tsundere. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 415. Yoshida has been quite unhappy recently. It's not because of the psychological trauma caused by the bullying of Makoto Takahashi before, nor because of the spoilers from Shizuka River that Clannad will have the heartbreaking content in the future, nor because of the recent plot of a certain middle school cartoonist to kill the readers. Yoshida is unhappy because he has read the comic Dream Eater published in the Weekly Shonen Jump last week. Because Yoshida's recent energy has been spent on the serialization of the comic Clannad and on guarding against Makoto Takahashi's various evil-tasting punishment games, Yoshida, who was originally the editor of the Weekly Shonen Jump, seems to be a little slack. Of course, it's not dereliction of duty. After all, for the comics serialized by Makoto Takahashi in the weekly, Yoshida will carefully and strictly review the comic manuscripts after receiving them every week. If it were another cartoonist who has been serializing in a weekly magazine for a long time, Yoshida might not need to do this. After all, cartoonists who can serialize in a weekly magazine for a long time have gradually become accustomed to the weekly serialization model and know how to deal with it. For example, the little otter with escape addiction, although he always complains like I don't want to draw or I can't draw anymore, as long as Yoshida induces him a little and sprinkles some bait, the little otter will take the bait and become a slave that Yoshida can drive at will. In short, when dealing with the little otter, Yoshida only needs to give the little otter the motivation to create comics. As for the content and plot of the comics, or the character settings, these are things that should be the responsibility of the cartoonist, and Yoshida doesn't need to worry about them at all. But when the target is changed to Makoto Takahashi, Yoshida can't do this, just like the comic manuscript of Dream Eater this time. This is a comic that describes the growth experience of cartoonist Ashiro Mumanjai. Since it was serialized, it has always ranked very well. However, due to the fierce competition in the weekly magazine, this comic seems to have never made it into the top 5. On the contrary, Ashiro Mumanjai's good friend has gained a lot of popularity among readers because of this comic, which has made their recently serialized new comic successfully overthrow the weekly serialization of Nazuma Eiji, and even won the first place for several weeks in a row. Although Yoshida already knew that this comic was created based on Ashiro Mumanjai's experience, although Yoshida has learned enough information from Ashiro Mumanjai to speculate the general plot of the comic, Although Yoshida once worried that Takahashi Makoto would deliberately change the content of the comic in order to enjoy the pleasure of killing readers, but all along, Takahashi Makoto has only talked about it, and has not put those dangerous and even twisted ideas into the comic, so Yoshida naturally relaxed his vigilance and became relaxed. Especially after reading this episode, Yoshida really regretted that he had neglected the manga Dream Eater during this period. Today, Aho Mumuha can be regarded as a popular cartoonist on the Weekly Shonen Jump, and the content of this episode of Dream Eater happens to be the story of Aho Mumuha just starting to serialize Suspect Detective Trap. In the comics, the duo of Aho Mumuha, who finally got the opportunity to serialize, were about to take this opportunity to show their talents, but Mashiro Tautu, who was in charge of drawing, fell down because of illness. In view of Mashiro Tautu's uncle who died of overwork, the editor-in-chief of the comics, while making the decision to stop the comic Suspect Detective Trap, also ordered Aho Mumuha to prohibit any work related to comic serialization before completing high school. Although Yoshida knew the subsequent development of this matter, with the joint efforts of the cartoonist and the editor, he did succeed in getting the editor-in-chief to retract the decision of letting Yoshiro Mumuha take a break until high school graduation, but the problem is that the readers who have been observing the comics don't know about this development. Moreover, the content of this episode, under the special arrangement of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, was only serialized to the time when the editor-in-chief made that unreasonable decision. The content of this episode. The reason why Yoshida's mouth twitched was of course not because of toothache, but because of the content of this episode of the comic Dream Eater in his hand. Well, Chen, the way you draw this chapter seems a bit. Are you dissatisfied? Takahashi Chen glanced at Yoshida, who was frowning, and muttered with a dissatisfied look, Hey, my cat, if it weren't for the wise decision made by the Commander-in-Chief, I would have used the content of this chapter to directly incite readers to attack your editor's headquarters. In a sense, I am showing mercy, you must remember to thank me for my kindness every day. By the way, what kind of show some mercy? Yoshida raised the comic manuscript in his hand with amusement and helplessness. After this episode is published, our weekly editorial department will definitely be denounced by readers. Huh? Is that so? Takahashi Makoto deliberately showed a surprised look, pinching his chin and muttering, if such an interesting thing really happens, by the way, should I run to the editorial headquarters like I did when the monthly magazine published Clannad last time, and observe the wonderful scene of you who stayed on the editorial side being bullied by the readers? I'm looking forward to it just thinking about it. Cartoonists wearing white coats are not allowed to enter the editorial department. The editorial department has such a rule. Hey, Yoshida, are you talking nonsense? How could there be such a baffling rule in an organization like the editorial side that fights against the five scumbags? Do you dare to directly put up a sign saying Cartoonist Phoenix Academy murderous no entry? Oh? Does the editorial side actually have such targeted regulations? Makoto Takahashi squinted his right eye and looked at Yoshida, with a dangerous smile on his face. It seems that if you are free one day, you need to come to confirm. But if the editor sets up a childish ambush like smashing a cup as a sign, with Demon Sword Broken Star, it should be enough, right? After all, I can fight those scumbags on the editor's side. 100. Yes, but before that, let me take a look at the content of the sentence. In response to Takahashi Makoto's threatening speech, Yoshida could only give a perfunctory answer. If he gives an answer such as "don't say such dangerous things" with a smile or begging to let the editorial department go, then Makoto Takahashi, who originally only stayed in the declaration stage, will enter the execution stage motor mode, really putting terrifying words into action. It has to be said that during the long time spent with a certain middle-class cartoonist, in addition to mastering some of Makoto Takahashi's action patterns, what Yoshida gained the most was how to talk without arousing resentment and anger in others. Reasonably change the topic under the circumstances. Under Makoto Takahashi's various trainings, Yashida's secret technique, topic-changing technique, has been successfully cultivated to the top. According to common sense, it is a very normal and common routine for the protagonist of a comic to encounter setbacks and endure hardships in the process of growing up. Many comics will use this routine, however, for the comic Dream Eater, that said, although this routine also applies, please don't forget that in a sense, this comic can be regarded as a comic that records facts. Aiken Mumenjai was hospitalized, and the editor issued a ban. Achen Mumenjai was angry and sad, unwilling to give in, and then began to prepare for a fight. Although in the comics of Dream Eater, Takahashi Makoto and the cartoonist Phoenix were not mentioned, the character of Inakama exists, but Yashida, who looked through the manga manuscript of this chapter again, did not feel that there was any problem in the connection of the content. The existence of the cartoonist Phoenix Academy murderer is the only way to distinguish the comic Dream Eaters from the real world. Although Cheng has always insisted that he will not appear in this comic, he always feels, Cheng is actually using this method to indirectly enhance his sense of existence. And, it is said that Makoto Takahashi, who was once encountered a bank robber, happened to be admitted to the hospital during that time, and like a Jumumenha, he almost suffered a ban from the editor. So, speaking of Cheng, I was wondering why you plan to publish the content of this chapter, apart from the need for the comic plot. Yashida suddenly thought of a possibility, raised his head and stared at Takahashi Makoto for a long time, and said he asked in a somewhat uncertain tone, although the editor-in-chief finally chose to withdraw the ban, Cheng, sure enough, you still regret what happened back then, right? Tisk, who would remember that kind of thing so clearly? At that time, I wanted to sneak out of the ward quietly late one night, and then ambush the commander on his way home and assassinate him, but am I such a narrow-minded being? If you want to take revenge on the editor, can the moral law restrain the murderous demon king of the Phoenix Academy? There is a saying that a gentleman's revenge is never too late in 10 years, okay. Yashida looked at Makoto Takahashi, who turned his head and got the answer he wanted to know without asking any more questions. Yashida didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said to Takahashi Makoto with some depression, say, Cheng, if you don't think so, why do you turn your head to the side? Is it because you are being talked about and don't dare to look at me directly? Looking deeply at a man who is single and ready to become a saint? My beloved cat, even if your evil soul has completely rotted beyond repair, I won't say anything, but I don't have that kind of twisted consciousness. Makoto Takahashi said this, drawing out his magic sword and looking at Yashida warily. If you want to develop in that direction, I can help you introduce it. After all, I have personally killed a certain purple girl before. Send the awful into the forbidden diamond suit philosophy world. Then Cheng, why did you finish this chapter? At least tell me, right? Although Yashida was already sure that this was an act of revenge that had been brewing for a long time by a vindictive manga artist, but, what he said now, I guess my end will be very bad. Hey, my beloved is a cat. The reason why I want to serialize the content of this chapter is just to show the so-called truth in front of human beings. The change of the times, the country's theory, values, and ethics changes. In short, human beings will always be affected by various things and change, and over a long period of time, they will lose themselves and fall into the abyss, being swallowed up by the torrent of the times and disappearing. The only thing people want to believe is that the reality before our eyes, so the truth is often the easiest to be deceived. This is human weakness and an insurmountable limit. This. Although the reasons were different, like Miss Aoi Ueno before, Yashida also felt a sense of disobedience at this moment. Why is it that Makoto Takahashi, who has always seemed to be in his mid-20s, now seems to be overly serious, even a little sacred? Wrong. It's an illusion. Bringing the truth called reality to mankind, this is the principle I pursue as a partner of justice, and it is also the choice of Stein's gate. Ha 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 ha. Makoto Takahashi said this last-minute speech made Yoshida's sense of disobedience instantly go offline. However, even if the words of Sword Emperor are stolen. But if you want the image of a middle-class cartoonist to instantly become taller, as expected, there is no possibility of this at all by visual inspection. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 416. Although the content of the comic always seems to be that Chen is deliberately planning to take revenge, but judging from the plot development of the comic itself, this kind of ups and downs seems to be very effective. Yoshida was sorting out the content of Dream Eater comic manuscript, while saying as usual, I accepted the comic manuscript, although I really want to remind Chen that you should pay attention to your health, I guess you won't listen. Hey hee hee. Speaking of Takahashi Makoto, at this time you show such an embarrassed smile like I was discovered by you, what the hell are you going to do? How is the completion of the manga Clannad going? The silence before speaking was because Yoshida was trying hard to suppress the power of complaining in his body. Yoshida with some difficulty suppressed the urge to complain about Takahashi Makoto, and brought the topic to another comic. Although the previous issue of the monthly magazine that serialized the comic Clannad was released, many readers said that because of the comic the plot is too heart-wrenching and I don't want to read it anymore, but many readers also said that after reading the part between Okazaki Tomoya and Chio, they hope to read it again. As expected, Makoto Takahashi turned around and walked to his desk. While sorting out the comic manuscripts on the desk, he began to lament about human beings' bad nature as usual. Humph. Readers will see I had expected such a reaction. When human beings are in dire straits, they always hope that a hero will appear to save them. But when the hero actually appears and saves himself, not only does he not express gratitude to the hero, but he actually and he justifiably blames heroes for always appearing in times of crisis. Tisk, 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 saviors are treated like this, let alone other things. Human beings are such capricious and ugly creatures. Chen, what you said is true. After Yoshida nodded thoughtfully and acknowledged Takahashi Chen's point of view, he seemed to suddenly remember something and immediately slapped himself hard on the head. Then he looked at Makoto Takahashi with a black line on his face. Speaking of Chen, aren't we discussing the plot of the comic Clannad now? Why did the topic change to discussing the ugly aspects of human nature? And what saddens me the most is that I didn't react immediately today and was led astray by Makoto Takahashi. My beloved cat, this means that your thinking circuit has finally been patched with a new patch, and you are beginning to get closer to the great majesty of the Phoenix Academy. Makoto Takahashi picked up the completed manga manuscript of Clannad and placed it on while handing it to Yoshida. He said with a smile, "Isn't this great?" Tisk, I don't think it's good at all when I hear what you said, Chen. Yoshida made such an arrogant statement while taking over the manga manuscript. Makoto Takahashi, who was about to finish the manga manuscript, looked at Yoshida who was about to look through the manga manuscript, and suddenly asked, speaking of my familiar cat, that thing I told you about Ryuko before, what do you think? Ruko? Oh. Chen, you mean Jinghee-kun? Of course. If it's convenient over there, I'll ask Jinghee-kun to come over later. Hearing Takahashi Makoto mention this matter, Yoshida flipped through the comic. The hand of the manuscript paused for a moment, then nodded and said, and Chen, the comic manuscript you completed seems to no longer need the guidance of me, the editor in charge, from various aspects. Seeing that Makoto Takahashi has begun to enter the cartoonist mode, Yoshida did not say the next words, he just said the beginning, then lowered his head and started reading the manga manuscript. Regarding a certain middle-level cartoonist, Yoshida said that this is the most difficult guy he has ever encountered among cartoonists since he started working as an editor. When treating Takahashi Makoto, you cannot treat ordinary cartoonists with the same attitude. Yoshida has known this a long time ago. But when it comes to comics by manga artist Hohoin Yoshima, to be honest, Yoshida has gradually developed a sense of loss recently. What kind of characters to draw, what kind of plot to draw, cartoonist Hohoin Kuma seems to have no need for the guidance of the editor in the process of completing the manga manuscript. How will the next plot develop and what kind of characters will appear? Every time Yoshida, after reading the manga manuscript and thinking hard for a long time, is ready to give some suggestions to Takahashi Makoto, he discovers, a certain secondary cartoonist has already realized these problems, and has already improved them on his own in the cartoon draft to be completed. Regarding certain plots or characters, the effect is even better than what Yoshida, the editor-in-chief, expected. Much better. Phoenix in Yakuza is really a talented person. No, he should be considered a monster-level cartoonist, right? Regarding Makoto Takahashi's evaluation, whether in the editorial side of monthly or weekly magazines, they are basically similar to this. Although colleagues on the editorial side all envy Yoshida for having such a monster-level cartoonist under his command, although Yoshida can't help but show off to his colleagues every time he talks about the murderous nature of the cartoonist Phoenix, however, the reality is that yes, whenever Yoshida calms down recently, he always considers whether he is suitable to be the editor-in-chief of the cartoonist Shoin Yoshima, and even begins to doubt whether he is a qualified editor. There is no need for the editor-in-chief to dictate the plot of the comic, because the cartoonist, Phoenix Academy Murama, can do it even better than the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-charge doesn't need suggestions or opinions on the character settings of the comics, because the manga artist Howin Kuma himself has already thought about how to perfect each character through the plot. On the contrary, as the editor-in-charge, because I don't know the plot of the comics, the suggestions I give are often narrow, because I don't understand the subsequent development of the comics, the opinions I give are often one-sided. Even if I have a flash of ideas and opinions about the comics, every time Yoshida has not had time to speak out, the other party has already taken the lead and perfected it by himself. Perhaps for the manga artist Howin Kuma, the editor-in-charge's usefulness is to collect the comic manuscripts every week and every month before the deadline. Just like the comic manuscript of this episode of Clannad in his hand, Yoshida has observed it from beginning to end no less than 3 times, but whether it is the development of the plot or the setting of the dialogue, there is absolutely no place to pick out problems. But in this way, can't anyone be the editor-in-charge of the manga artist Howin Kuma? The more Yoshida flipped through the comic manuscript in his hand, the more he felt so. Without spending most of my time on Cheng, I can use the extra time to supervise Hiramarukun or train the newcomer Jinghua. This might be a good choice. After all, Cheng doesn't need me anymore, right? My beloved cat, your expression, tisk, it really looks like an abandoned pet. Yoshida suddenly heard Takahashi Makoto's disgusted voice, and came back to his senses from his deep thoughts. What he saw was Takahashi Makoto staring at him from a close distance with curiosity. Speaking of this chapter's comic draft, does it have this special effect of making people fall into contemplation? I remember that after Ding Ding Ji-san finished the content of this chapter, he ran to the toilet, crying and calling his father, saying extremely disgusting words, but there was no reaction like my beloved cat. Maybe it's because Ding Ding brought too much of his feelings into the process of completing the comic. Yoshida turned his head away a little unnaturally. Tisk, I thought I accidentally put the tears technique was implanted into the silence technique. Wait, maybe it's because your body structure is different from that of ordinary people, so this reaction occurs. Tisk. What's going on? It turns out that it's not me who's wrong, but you, my beloved cat. Takahashi Makoto looked like he was shirking responsibility, which made Yoshida's mouth twitch unconsciously. Ah Cheng, you guy. He should be angry at this moment. But my beloved cat, after reading this episode, you just entered a silent state without crying. Takahashi Makoto complained a little depressed. According to my expected effect, after reading this episode, my beloved cat will show all kinds of ugly behaviors when humans burst into tears, just like Ding Ding Ji-san, tisk. It seems that the content of this episode is visually tear-jerking. The effect is still a little lacking. This is, what a bad taste, but why? Hey, 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 my cat, after watching such a touching father-son plot, you didn't cry? The editor-in-chief's soul in your body will cry. It will definitely cry, Takahashi Makoto said, patting Yoshida's shoulder hard. The existence called editor-in-chief's soul in my cat, obey the orders of my cartoonist Winkuma, in order to achieve the great cause of love and healing, in order to implement the truth of darkness and evil, break free from the body cage that imprisons your freedom, bring sin and darkness to the world, bring despair and destruction to mankind, become the vanguard of playing with the souls of the world. And come to this world to protect the pleasure of the great devil Winkuma. It hurts, damn it, and there is nothing like that in my body. By the way, Chen, you must have said that on purpose because you wanted to hit me. There is no point in turning your head away and pretending to be innocent. You just showed an expression of task, seen through, on your face. Right, I saw it, why is it now? But since it can make the absent-minded my favorite cat enter the silent state, in a sense, the content of this episode of the Manga Clanet should be considered a success, right? Just as Yoshida was roaring angrily, Takahashi Makoto pinched his chin and sighed thoughtfully. My favorite cat, as the editor-in-chief, you are the most suitable person to test the effect of the manga. So my role is just to test the effect of the manga, although this statement is very hurtful, but, I should be angry, why do I feel a little happy at this moment? It seems that choosing to let my favorite cat be my editor-in-chief was indeed the choice of Steins Gate. Takahashi Makoto, who was unaware of the situation, launched a magical finishing blow to Yoshida, and it seemed that, the effect was outstanding. Tisk. But I always feel that, becoming your editor-in-chief, Chen, is the most unfortunate choice in my life. Oh my, you can't say that. If it's someone else on the editorial side, for example, the sea urchin head who is called a good guy by his good friends, it is estimated that he will explode before I can play with him for a few days. For example, a certain servant called a fool by the king of Black Flame, it is estimated that he will be broken in 3 days, at most 3 days, for example. Takahashi Makoto looked Yoshida up and down, with a weird smile on his face. After all, it is quite rare to be able to play with a guy like you, my cat, who can be bullied at will, and a toy that can be played with at will without breaking, which is quite rare. Okay. Now Yoshida has one more reason to become the editor-in-chief of Takahashi Makoto. To protect colleagues on the editorial side from the persecution of a certain Chuyunibu cartoonist. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 417. Chapter 417. This comic is. When Shizukawa headed towards Takahashi Makoto's house with the manga manuscript, Yoshida, who was relieved of his knot, and Takahashi Makoto, who was relaxing, began to discuss the manga Shizukawa wanted to serialize. Speaking of Chen, have you read Shizukawa-kun's manga manuscript? Yoshida stuffed the Dream Eater manga manuscript into his backpack and began to inquire about the news from Takahashi SEI. Although Shizukawa-kun's manga was previously the review of that work was very good, but as you know, Chen, it is basically impossible for comics of that style to be serialized in a weekly. My familiar cat, it's really a pity this time. I have no idea what kind of manga Ryoko has completed. Makoto Takahashi shook his head at the confused Yoshida and spread his hands. Although Ryoko has done it before, ZI once asked me to take a look at the new comics, but I refused. Eh? Why did you refuse? Yoshida looked at Makoto Takahashi with some confusion. Chen, when you met Shizuka-kun before, didn't you say that you liked Shizuka-kun's dark style comics? Now that Shizuka-kun has finished the new manga, logically speaking, you should really want to read it. If I speak as a reader, of course I want to read Ryuko's new comics, but my familiar cat, this is not what Ryuko expects, right? Makoto Takahashi tapped his fingers on the table. Looking at Yoshida seriously, his tone rarely became serious. The new manga completed by Ryoko was created with the purpose of wanting to serialize this manga in a weekly magazine. The person responsible for reviewing the manga is whether comics can be serialized in a weekly magazine is not what I, as a cartoonist, should do, but what a responsible editor like you, my cat, should do, right? Well, you're right to say that, Cheng. After hearing what Takahashi Cheng said, Yoshida couldn't find any reason to refute it for a moment. But speaking of which, I'm also a little curious. Seeing that Yoshida had already understood what he wanted to say, Takahashi Makoto changed the subject and continued to speculate on the content of Jinghe River's comics. According to what Lyoza said before judging from the completed work, the comic completed this time should also belong to the same kind of dark comic. However, considering that Ryoko has been responsible for completing the manga draft of Clannad recently, I think Ryoko will be affected to some extent. Influenced by Clannad. Mentioning the influence of the comic Clannad, if Shizuka is like Takahashi Makoto, and becomes a vicious devil who likes to dig holes and kill readers, Yoshida's body suddenly I started to tremble unconsciously, and I started to worry about the finished manga of Kyunghae. No matter whether it is the cartoonist or the assistant, it is impossible to change the completed comics. But every time when completing the comic draft, I put strong emotions into it, and even bring it into my own soul. As time goes by, people will eventually, but it will be changed by comics. Makoto Takahashi turned to look at the comic manuscripts of Clannad piled on the table. He didn't know what he thought of, and suddenly laughed happily. So I'm really looking forward to Lyoza's new comics. Oops, I always feel an ominous premonition. Yoshida looked up at the clock hanging on the wall. It was less than 10 minutes before Jinghe's agreed arrival time. When Shizuka came to Takahashi Makoto's house with the manga manuscript, Takahashi Makoto had already finished his rest time and entered the cartoonist mode. He squatted on a chair and started drawing the manga manuscript, while Yoshida was lying on his back. On the sofa, he obviously entered the state of lying down and lying down. Oh, Lyoza, you are finally here. Makoto Takahashi saw a look of regret on his face when he saw Shizuo Hihi, and turned to the cat and dog pressing on Yoshida and said, Sadaharu, Ruri, and Ryoko are here, and you can break the seal on my familiar cat. The next task is to go to the witch, and cooperate with the witch Nina to drag Rin and Seiji into the dream world. After hearing Takahashi Makoto's words, Sadaharu and Ruri immediately jumped off Yoshida. Then, under the surprised gazes of Yoshida and Shizuka, they ran to Takahashi Makoto and knelt down on the ground to show their respect. After resigning, he went straight to the bedroom. No matter how many times I watch it, I will always feel that the cats and dogs in Takahashi Makoto's house have become refined spirits. The speechless Shizuka and the speechless Yoshida looked at each other, and their thoughts instantly synchronized. Teacher from the Phoenix Institute, Mr. Yoshida, these are the manga manuscripts of the new manga. Well, also, the name of the new manga is. The first person to break the silent atmosphere was Jinghe, who came back from his surprise. He took out a thick stack of manga manuscripts from his bag. When Shizuka was about to briefly introduce his manga manuscripts to the two of them, he found that Takahashi Makoto and Yoshida reached out their hands at the same time, both wanting to get it as soon as possible. Comic manuscript. Tisk, my beloved cat, you are lucky this time. Makoto Takahashi gave up the opportunity to observe the manga manuscript immediately because his cell phone rang. However, when Makoto Takahashi walked to the balcony to answer the phone, he did not forget to place a curse on Yoshida, but according to the big universe setting of first attack must die, my familiar cat does not have the aura of the protagonist, so what if you see the manga manuscript first? The god of death will come to your door soon. It's lunch. If it were usual, Yoshida would definitely use poison tongue to fight back against Takahashi Makoto, and then be fought back by Takahashi Makoto to his knees, but Yoshida ignored Takahashi Makoto's vicious curse this time, and didn't even make any response, because at this moment Yoshida's attention was firmly attracted by the comic manuscript in his hand. Although this was not the first time that the editor-in-chief of the comic manuscript was observed, Jinghee River still felt very nervous. Looking at Yoshida, who was quickly flipping through the comic manuscript, Jinghee River, who was sitting, swallowed nervously and began to carefully restrain his breathing, for fear that his breathing would be too loud and interfere with Yoshida's observation of the comic manuscript. Shizuru carefully observed the changes in Yoshida's expression. Yoshida, who was observing the comics, would feel uneasy subconsciously if there was any slight change in his expression. "Ryoko, don't worry too much." Takahashi Makoto, who had ended the call, suddenly appeared behind Shizuru, patted Shizuru's shoulder in a comforting manner and whispered, "After all, among the editors, my cat is a toy with a relatively high durability, so don't worry about your comic plot, and my cat will be broken or something. No, Mr. Fengguangai Yuan." In fact, Shizuru was not worried about this. However, before Shizuru opened his mouth to explain to Makoto Takahashi, there was a new change on Yoshida's side. This development is. As if seeing some surprising plot, Yoshida, who had been quietly looking at the comics, showed a surprised expression on his face and cried out. "By the way, Ryoko, are you sure there are no 18+ inharmonious scenes in your comics?" Seeing Yoshida's sudden loss of composure, Takahashi Makoto asked Jinghee River curiously, "Why does my cat look like he saw something exciting?" "Hey, Chen, I heard, Jinghee-kun's comics don't have the content you imagined." "But..." Yoshida suddenly put down the comics in his hand, his eyes wandered between Takahashi Makoto and Jinghee River several times, then he sighed and put away the comics. He handed the comic manuscript to Takahashi Makoto, and said with a wry smile, "But such a plot twist, forget it. You will understand after you read it, Makoto." "Oh? It seems that my beloved cat likes this comic very much." Takahashi Makoto took the comic manuscript from Yoshida, and saw Yoshida occasionally making comments like "great twist" and "great development." After complaining about Yoshida, he opened the comic manuscript. Then, Hey, Makoto Takahashi jumped up from his chair after just reading the beginning. This plot is. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 418. Takahashi Makoto's overly surprised reaction not only shocked the already nervous Shizuru River, but also Yoshida. Just as people decay and die, the country will eventually go to ruin. Even the imperial capital, which has been prosperous for 1,000 years, has now become a corrupt living hell. The demons and monsters in human skin are rampant as if no one is around. If God has no time to punish evil, we will wipe it out in the darkness. All of us are professional killers. Takahashi Makoto just read out the opening narration of Shizuru River's new comic. Although this descriptive narration, combined with the ugly appearance of humans, has indeed roughly explained the plot background of the comic, allowing anyone who observes the comic draft to understand at the first time that this is not a mainstream comic, but the reason why Takahashi Makoto is excited is not this. But... no, wait. If it's just the opening narration, maybe we can't be sure. Takahashi Makoto came back to his senses from the excitement, picked up the comic manuscript again, and said something that made Shizukawa and Yoshida confused. Read the content of this chapter first before making a judgment. If it's true, isn't this very interesting? Sure enough, everything is the choice of the door of fate. Ha ha ha. By the way, Shizukawa-kun, I remember that your opening chapter just described the story background of the comic, right? Looking at Takahashi Makoto, who was flipping through the comic manuscript while laughing strangely, Yoshida whispered to Shizukawa with a frown on his face, "Are you sure that there is no preset magic formula in the comic manuscript that ordinary people can't see, but will make the second-year cartoonist go crazy after reading it?" Huh? Even Mr. Yoshida? Should we say that they are worthy of being the editor-in-chief of the comic collection, who have cooperated for many years? Even their thinking patterns are unusually similar. Shizukawa turned to look at Yoshida with a helpless look on his face, and managed to reply through his teeth, "Of course there is no such strange thing. Absolutely not." "Ah, that's really great. I thought Shizukawa-kun would be like Cheng, saying that some weird magic spells were actually implanted in the comics." Yoshida breathed a sigh of relief, holding his chest with an expression like, "If there is another Chuyunabaku manga artist, I will go crazy," and said to Shizukawa with relief, "This is the reaction of a normal manga artist. I originally thought that Shizukawa-kun, as Cheng's assistants, will be infected with certain special diseases in a subtle way, ahem, but through the test just now, it seems that you, Jing-hee, are not affected by Cheng, which is really great. Although I respect Mr. Feng Guangaiyuan very much, I think Mr. Feng Guangaiyuan's personality." Jing-hee turned his head and looked at Takahashi Makoto, who was quickly flipping through the comic manuscript, and said with a twitch at the corner of his mouth, "Probably in my life, I will never." Looking at Jing-hee silently watching Takahashi Makoto, Yoshida also stopped complaining and fell into deep thought. When Jing-hee submitted his work to the monthly magazine earlier, as a debut comic work, it directly surprised the entire editorial side at the serialization meeting. Although that work was too dark and not suitable for the style of Weekly Shonen Jump, it still left a deep impression in the hearts of the editors on the editorial side. I remember that it seemed to be Aida at that time. He strongly recommended to editor-in-chief Sasaki that the new serialization should adopt Jing-hee's work, but in the end it was rejected by the editor-in-chief. Then, under the arrangement of the editor-in-chief, Shizukawa became the assistant of the cartoonist Haoru Nkuma. He only serialized a short story in the weekly magazine, and then arranged this promising newcomer to be the assistant of a middle school cartoonist. At the beginning, Yoshida had no idea why the editor-in-chief made such an arrangement, but thinking back to the work he had seen before, Yoshida seemed to understand what the editor-in-chief meant. Although it is a very remarkable talent to be able to draw a comic that reflects the inner darkness 100%, but for the cartoonist himself, in a sense, it is a devastating disaster. Because comics can reflect the soul of the cartoonist, so if you have been completing dark comics, no matter how strong the spirit is, no matter how determined the cartoonist is, one day you will not be able to withstand the erosion of darkness. If he had agreed to Shizukawa's serialization of the dark work, perhaps the influence of Weekly Shonen Jump on readers would have been further expanded, and Shizukawa would have gathered a lot of popularity in a very short time. However, the final result would have made Shizukawa, the cartoonist, fall into a dark vortex and unable to escape, and even completely ruined the cartoonist Shizukawa's life. The price of increasing the weekly sales and attracting more readers was to ruin a cartoonist, and even ruin a person's life. If Yuisha really adopted such an inhumane approach, it might have ceased to exist long ago, right? Hey, Ryoko, I won't read the next plot. Makoto Takahashi, who suddenly spoke, brought Yoshida back to his senses from his contemplation. Looking at Makoto Takahashi carefully sorting out the comic manuscript in his hand while showing a weird smile, Yoshida suddenly felt a chill. After Mr. Yoshida just finished reading the manga manuscript, he just commented that the twist of the plot is amazing, and you, Mr. Kuma from the Phoenix Academy, haven't even finished reading the manga manuscript. Jing-hee, who had been nervous, said after Chiao Cheng's words. He seemed to have lost all his strength in an instant, and said softly in a disappointed tone, "When I created this comic, although I invested my emotions and soul as the teacher from the Phoenix Institute said, it turned out, still doesn't work." "No, it's not like that. Looking at Jinghee's lonely expression at this moment, Yoshida suddenly felt a sense of guilt and immediately explained hurriedly, "The plot twist of this comic is very well designed. Mr. Yoshida, you don't need to comfort me deliberately." Jinghee's look of loss and that desperate tone made Yoshida's inner guilt rise to another level again. "So Shizuka-kun, I was too surprised by the plot of the manga, so I forgot to comment on your manga." Yoshida's hurried explanation seemed to have no effect at all. At least Jinghee's frustration has not been relieved yet. "Tisk, my beloved is a cat. If you keep talking, maybe Lyoza will feel world weary tomorrow and go directly to the kingdom of heaven to report the day after tomorrow. By the way, Makoto Takahashi, are you cursing?" It's definitely a curse, although Yoshida wanted to roar like this to Takahashi Makoto at the moment. Looking at Shizuka, who was completely silent, Yoshida wisely chose to shut up. "Ruko, it's not that I can't stand your manga manuscript, but I found something interesting." As Takahashi Makoto said, he walked to his desk, took out a piece of manuscript paper and started writing quickly. "Get up." After a while, Takahashi Makoto handed the manuscript paper full of words in his hand to Shizuohi, and said with a smile, "Then, the time to witness the miracle has come. Ryoko, look at what I wrote. Hey, my beloved cat, at this time, shouldn't you be like a villain, making exit declarations like 'I will come back' or 'it feels so disgusting,' and then be blown away gorgeously? Why are you still here? Blow up? That way I won't be able to come back. Cheng, you, ugh." Before Yoshida could use the three-part complaint he was good at, he was banned by a middle-class cartoonist. As for the method of banning, a sword is placed at the side of the neck. Do normal people know the meaning of this behavior, right? This is. After reading the prop provided by Makoto Takahashi, the manuscript paper recording mysterious words, Jinghee raised his head and looked at Makoto Takahashi in disbelief. "Phoenix Academy teacher, you. Hey, Ryoko, the following plot, it should be like this, right?" Makoto Takahashi tilted his head and looked at Jinghee River with a smile. "Maybe there are some differences in the character names, but the general development of the plot, I think it might be fun to draw it like this." "Yeah. This is what I want to draw." Jinghee nodded with surprise on his face, looking at Makoto Takahashi with admiration in his eyes. "I just read a word, no, just by reading a little bit of the plot of the comic, I can predict the development of my new comic. Mr. Phoenix Academy, you are really awesome. Just by reading a part of the comic manuscript, I can guess the plot of the entire comic. Hey, although I know you are a monster-level cartoonist, Cheng, but you can do this to this extent." The forbidden speech seal Yoshida, who was untied, had already noticed a fact from the conversation and reactions between the two that he could not imagine or believe at all. Because for Phoenix Academy murderer, cartoonist is just a cover-up profession. My real profession is the legendary time observer who can cross the world barrier. I'm just a wanderer. Ignoring Yoshida, who interrupted and tried to intervene in the conversation, Takahashi Makoto frowned with dissatisfaction and stared at Jinghee in confusion. "Is that just that? Don't you have anything else to say?" Jinghee lowered his head and was silent for a moment, then raised his head and looked at Makoto Takahashi with some depression, and asked with some uncertainty, "Teacher from the Phoenix Institute, are you trying to say that in fact, the film I completed did you come up with comics a long time ago?" "No. Of course it's not this. And this kind of question is not important." After hearing Jinghee's question, Takahashi Makoto seemed a little crazy and began to pace back and forth impatiently. After thinking for a moment, Takahashi Makoto and then gradually calmed down the restlessness in his heart, and continued his conversation with Jinghee. "Hey, Lyoza, let me put it bluntly, the king of heaven and the tiger of earth. Not to mention Shizu." Even Yoshida looked at Makoto Takahashi with an embarrassed face. Finally, Shizu broke the awkward atmosphere and asked with some reluctance, "Phoenix Academy teacher, You, what are you talking about? Hey. Don't you know? Originally, I thought Lyosa you were, no, wait. It seems that there has never been such a rule, the traveler must be from my big, right? Then there is still a possibility. Makoto Takahashi pinched his chin and murmured to himself something that Yoshida and Shizukawa didn't understand. Then he raised his head again and looked at Shizukawa, and asked with an unusually serious expression, Ruko, do you know Fuyuki City? Holy Grail War? Or do you know Mr. Octopus who was mistaken for the moon exploder? Or do you know God Sakamoto who brought all the teachers and students in the school into the Crystal Palace? I'm sorry, this is the first time I heard what you said, Teacher Phoenix Academy, Jinghe said with a look of apology and admiration. These sound like they could be good comic themes. You don't have to think about it to know that the only person who can say this at this time is Yoshida, the editor-in-chief. Tisk. I thought I finally met someone of the same kind. I didn't expect that everything was just a coincidence, huh? Accident. Takahashi Cheng suddenly stopped mid-sentence, with a strange smile on his face, huh? Sure enough, there is no such thing in this world. By chance, Time Observer is the only one, sure enough, everything is just Stein's, Gates' choice. Ha 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 ha. Although Takahashi Makoto is looking up and laughing at this moment, both Yoshida and Shizuka can feel the depressing helplessness and pain from Takahashi Makoto's laughter. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 419. While giving people endless hope, it also brings endless despair. Is this the so-called destiny? After stopping his cathartic laughter, Takahashi Cheng looked at the sky and said in a melancholy tone. Although he had vaguely guessed that this would be the result, after truly confirming that Jinghe River was not the same existence as himself, Takahashi Makoto still seemed a little disappointed. Although this kind of loss only lasted for a moment, it still made him feel a little disappointed. The atmosphere in the room became quite depressing. If it were Makoto Takahashi who had just come to this world, he might have gone berserk after this stimulation, but after all, Makoto Takahashi has been living in this world for many years, and even has a family built by his wife and children. Family bond, so whether it's melancholy or confused, it only lasts for a moment. Ruko, this is a very good comic. Makoto Takahashi exited the melancholy reflection on life mode and began to say to Jinghe, who looked expectant, your soul, your will, I can already feel it from the comics you've completed. He didn't interrupt rashly, because Jinghe knew that Takahashi Makoto hadn't finished speaking yet. Human beings are creatures that are easily corrupted. Human beings who have been indulged in darkness for a long time can easily lose their way forward, and may even become cynical or despairing and confused because of it, but they want to break free from it. It's quite difficult to come out, Makoto Takahashi praised Jinghe unstintingly while flipping through the comics in his hand, but you did it this time, Ryuko. I can feel that you are no longer like when you first came here, with the cold rain falling in your heart and your soul lost in the darkness. This is really an amazing thing. Yoshida has finished reading the follow-up content completed by Makoto Takahashi. Although he is the editor in charge of reviewing the manga, he does not rashly intervene in the conversation between Makoto Takahashi and Shizukawa at this moment, except because he is concerned about Makoto Takahashi's follow-up content of the manga. In addition to the surprise caused by the accurate guess, Yoshida, who was planning to remain silent and cold-hearted to the end, also wanted to verify the guess that he already had a vague answer to. Ruko, I don't want you to give up the darkness in your heart, because this is simply impossible to do, and it is also something I don't want to happen. Makoto Takahashi placed the manga manuscript on Jinghe River. In front of him, the playful and informal look on his face disappeared, replaced by a serious look that made Yoshida feel inconsistent, because that means you are escaping. It means you are denying the life you have experienced over the years. People can be cowardly, incompetent, or lack the courage to face the darkness in their hearts, But no matter how difficult the situation is, you cannot choose to escape, because if you choose to escape the first time, there will be a second time. 3 times, when escaping has become your habit, it is also the moment when your soul is forever sealed in darkness and can no longer be redeemed. Is there something wrong with my ears, or is everything happening now just an illusion? After hearing Makoto Takahashi speak like this, the corners of Yoshida's mouth began to twitch violently, and his eyes looked at Makoto Takahashi so weird and weird. That middle-class cartoonist who is immersed in his own world all day long, actually educates Jinghee in a serious manner? That devil in white coat, whose bad taste has reached the realm of ghost animal, actually persuades Jinghee to live a brave and active life. Makoto Takahashi, who thinks and behaves differently from ordinary people, actually uses normal human communication modes to communicate happily with Shizuka? Long live! Oh my god! This kind of thing that once only appeared in dreams actually happens in reality. Just when Yoshida was about to complain, he felt a chill. Then, although you didn't use the mind-reading skill, but my beloved cat, when you were fantasizing about things about me, you must have had the consciousness to look death in the eye, right? Who was talking to Jinghee? Takahashi Makoto suddenly drew his sword at a speed that was imperceptible to the naked eye. Impartially, the tip of the sword hit Yoshida's throat. Because there are more interesting things that need to be done today, so, my beloved cat, be glad that you saved a small life. Shizuka chose to completely ignore Yoshida's look for help, putting aside other reasons. The first thing Shizuka understood after becoming Makoto Takahashi's assistant was this: when a middle-class manga artist held a magic sword. Never make any rebellious words or deeds that may cause hostility. The decadent imperial capital depicted in the comics is just like the world we live in, which is already full of despair. In a world dominated by dirty adults, it seems that there is no hope left. In order to keeping Yoshida in the technical and silent state for a long time, Makoto Takahashi did not lower his hand holding the sword. Therefore, the scene at this moment really looks like Makoto Takahashi who has a hostage and is confronting Shizuka. So Lyuze, living in this dark and desperate world, you may have thought about escaping from this life in extreme ways, but now, from your comics, I feel the meaning of hope exists. And that hope comes from your decision to bear the darkness in your heart and move forward, and from your soul that has become strong enough. Hope, maybe, that's really the case. Although both Yoshida and other assistants have told themselves directly or implicitly that whenever Takahashi Makoto enters serious nonsense, it will become more difficult to communicate than usual, but until today, Jinghee truly understood that it was not that Makoto Takahashi in that state was difficult to communicate, but that it was because Makoto Takahashi had reached the pinnacle of seeing through the essence of all things. In the whole twisted world like hell, there is still a glimmer of hope and light. Although it is basically an impossible task to dispel the darkness that pervades the entire world with just this tiny glimmer of hope and this faint light, but it is better than immersing yourself in the darkness and giving up. Is it better to abandon all hope and abandon all light? Just like the seeds of plants, they have not given up their desire and yearning for sunlight because they are buried deep in the soil. Human beings have not given up the opportunity to struggle because the world is full of darkness and distortion. So, what needs to be done is not to escape. Instead, he carries the darkness in his heart that scares him and moves forward. Maybe the road ahead is full of thorns, maybe the road ahead is difficult and dangerous, maybe you will encounter many sad experiences in the process of moving forward, maybe you will suffer unbearable pain in your body and soul in the process of moving forward. But even so, as long as you grit your teeth and move forward with all your strength, you will always encounter light and hope. The plot of comics is like this, and so is life. Perhaps it is because of understanding this truth, or perhaps it is because of having this awareness, that Jinghee was able to create this comic, called Jean, the comic Red Eyes of Red. Then Shizuka-kun, if possible, I will submit this manga to the serialization meeting. Yoshida, who had been banned from speaking, regained his freedom, despite being full of anger towards Makoto Takahashi. However, as a qualified and conscientious editor, I still put my work first. Although this style of comics is not very suitable for the weekly Shonen Jump, but if it is serialized in a monthly magazine, there should be no problem. Monthly. After hearing this, Jinhee looked at Makoto Takahashi, who was also waiting for his answer, and fell into a brief silence. Although I am not the editor-in-chief of the monthly magazine, because of someone. At this point, Yoshida quietly turned his head and looked at Makoto Takahashi beside him, and then pretended to be nonchalant and continued, I also have the right to recommend and submit manga manuscripts to the monthly magazine, but unfortunately, I will not be able to become your editor-in-chief in the future, Jinhee-kun. Mr. Yoshida, if my manga passes the serialization meeting. Shizukawa looked at Makoto Takahashi and asked hesitantly, will it be serialized starting from the next monthly issue? Of course. Because Cheng's Clannad is so popular, the monthly magazine has cut off 3 comics of the same type in succession. Now the monthly magazine is worried about not having suitable comic manuscripts. Looking in the mirror, come on, Yoshida. Your expression at this time, especially that smile, is exactly the same as those who specialize in seducing little lowly girls. Oh, my familiar cat, are you saying that this manga by Ruako will be serialized in the next monthly issue? Makoto Takahashi suddenly laughed expectantly and patted Shizuka with his hand on the shoulder. That's really great. Lyuzi, hurry up and enter the serialization, and then have a brutal fight in the monthly magazine. No, let's have an upright showdown in the monthly magazine. Yoshida and Jinhee fell silent at the same time. The reason why the two of them were silent was not because of the broken smile on Takahashi Makoto's face when he spilled the beans before, but because of the obvious look on the face of a certain second-level cartoonist after he finished speaking. Finally appeared the look of a new toy that can be bullied and crushed at will. Well, Mr. Yoshida, if possible, I hope to help the Phoenix Academy teacher complete the comic Clannad before starting the serialization of this comic. Jinhee, who came back to his senses first, immediately while hesitatingly choosing to reject the opportunity, he also did not forget to convey a hidden message to Yoshida with his eyes. Yes, that's right. After all, Jin-kun, you still have to assist Cheng to complete the comic Clannad. If you start a new serial, you will be too busy. It seemed that he received it smoothly. The message conveyed by Shizuo and Yoshida's choice of Shizuo to refuse serialization did not show the retention and persuasion attitude that a responsible editor should show. Hey! Have you been seen through? Takahashi Makoto muttered with some resentment, and immediately began to drive Yoshida away with a bad attitude. Hey, my cat is my companion. Next I and Ryoko will start to complete the manga manuscript. It's time. So, it's time for you to exit. Hey. I still need to discuss the details of the manga with Shizuka-kun. Yoshida tried to protest, but the pitiable shadow that is confused by the darkness, the soul that hurts, despises others, and is addicted to sin. Do you want to die once? Takahashi Makoto pulled up the white coat on his body and said to Yoshida with a smile. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 420. Teacher Feng Guangai, the comics you gave me have all been completed. Just when the other 3 people on the assistant side were still working hard to complete the comics, Jinhee River suddenly stood up and brought a thick stack of comics on the table to Takahashi Makoto. Among all the assistants, Jinhee River is the type who doesn't talk much but works the hardest. But every time after Takahashi Makoto distributes the comics, the first person to complete the comics is Jinhee River. This was originally a very common thing here. But what is slightly different from the past is that today, Jinhee River kept his head down from beginning to end when he spoke, and did not look directly at Takahashi Makoto as usual, and had the so-called spiritual battle with a certain middle school cartoonist through eye contact. Oh? Have you finished it all? Takahashi Makoto put down the brush in his hand, took the comic manuscript and quickly flipped through it, and at the same time did not forget to confirm with Jinghe River, "Hey, Ryoko, by the way, are you sure there is nothing missing from the magic formula I asked you to implant in the comic manuscript?" Jinghe River lowered his head and remained silent, because Takahashi Makoto's inexplicable setting was still beyond the scope of what normal people could accept. Jinghe River didn't know how to answer. Searched can on Google. That won't work, Ryoko. I've said it before, if you want to destroy humanity or rule the world through comics, you must first implant magic spells that match the comics in the comics. Takahashi Makoto didn't seem to notice Jinghe River's abnormality, and put the comics he had quickly flipped through aside. Instead of using violent means such as war to rule humanity through terror, it's better to use comics to erode the human spirit, control humans ideologically, and then get this world. The best example is right in front of us. Tisk, although Takahashi Makoto didn't directly name anyone, Uncle Ding Ding who made the dissatisfied sound, "That's right, I'm talking about you. You've completely exposed your teeth." The reason why Uncle Ding Ding was unhappy was simple, because the comics of the recent comic Clannad with a heart-wrenching plot were basically completed by himself. As a cartoonist's assistant, completing a heartbreaking comic book is not a difficult thing to accept. At least before becoming Takahashi Makoto's assistant, Ding Ding had worked as an assistant to other cartoonists and completed many heartbreaking comic books. However, this time is different. For Uncle Ding Ding, who just had a child, the greatest pleasure after finishing work every day is to go home as quickly as possible and accompany his child. Only when he changes his job from magician to father, will he understand how happy it is to watch his child grow up. However, the crazy Takahashi Makoto just handed over all the comic books of the heartbreaking plot between Chio and Okazaki Tomoya to Uncle Ding Ding to complete alone. Although I know that this is the plot of the comics, although I always keep reminding myself, and although I have learned from Makoto Takahashi that the comic Clannad will have a happy ending in the end, however, looking at Tomoya Okazaki, who is also a father in the comics, the man who has been working hard for Shio, the father who even chose to give up his job to take care of Shio, the decadent young man who has been indifferent to his children to the father who is willing to give everything for his children, Uncle Ding Ding always unconsciously puts himself into this role in the process of completing the comics. Although I know that I am just an assistant to assist the cartoonist to complete the comics, as the subsequent plot of Clannad gradually unfolds, every time Uncle Ding Ding puts down his brush, his heart will be filled with an inexplicable pain. That sensible and strong little girl, the little girl who finally gets to live happily with her father, will soon die because of the torture of the disease. The happy family that was created with great effort will soon be shattered. The guilt of destroying someone else's happy family with his own hands. The father who finally got rid of the pain of losing his beloved, the father who was about to live happily with his daughter, had to suffer an unbearable blow in his life again. After the death of his beloved, he had to lose his only daughter again. The guilt of making a good father lose his beloved daughter. When completing the comics recently, Uncle Tintin, whose mind has gradually been influenced by the comic Clannad, was basically in a very low mood. Especially every time he went home and saw his crying and noisy son, Uncle Tintin always easily thought of the comics he had just completed not long ago. The sad mood seemed to have entered a rhythm that could not be stopped at all. But having said that, the comics that Uncle Tintin completed with this mood, the appeal, and so on are still quite powerful. At least after Shizukawa and Mayuri saw the comics completed by Uncle Tintin, whether it was the innocent girl or the dark-hearted boy, they all consciously turned on the tears running mode. The only person who has not watched this heart-wrenching part of Clannad is probably Miss Ueno Aoi. Don't let small animals see this part. Although this was a kind warning from Makoto Takahashi to Uncle Tintin at the time, Uncle Tintin did choose to accept Makoto Takahashi's warning because he cared about his own life. But in fact, Makoto Takahashi's real intention was just to observe how Miss Aoi Ueno, who has been immersed in the world of cute killing, suddenly saw this part of the sadistic plot in the following days. When the happy world fell directly into hell, it was just a look of collapse. This feeling of being dragged directly from heaven to hell, don't you find it super interesting and loving? Sure enough, contrasting cuteness is the way to go. Of course, as far as Uncle Tintin is concerned, a certain second-grade cartoonist will make remarks of a magic last-hitting nature from time to time, just like today. This is the most abhorrent and unacceptable thing. But Tintin-ji-san, I think you've probably felt it, right? Makoto Takahashi looked at Tintin, who was filled with resentment, but a happy smile appeared on his face. He said in a slow tone, "Creatures like human beings always don't know how to cherish things that are easily obtained. They don't regret it until they lose it. If God gives it again, no, it should be that people can only truly experience it after they have lost it. You will understand this truth only when you start to regret your past actions with pain and heartbreak." So I think Tintin Gisang has been very attached to his children in recent times, right? Is it because of the manga clannad, Jing-hee, who has always called Takahashi Makoto Phoenixan teacher, played the role of a good student again today? Although Tintin-ji-san can't finish the manga manuscript as quickly as you, Ryoko, and the details of the background details are not as delicate as those of small animals, but in terms of completing the plot between Chio and Okazaki Tomoya's father and daughter, Tintin-ji-san is absolutely much more than you. Makoto Takahashi lightly slapped his chest and said to Jing-hee, "If you, Ryoko, tried your best to bring your own feelings into it when completing the manga manuscript, then Ding-ding-ji-san is completing it. When I was writing the manga, I already thought of myself as Tomoya Okazaki, so, this is the real difference." Cheng, you are really. Although Ding Ding's tone still sounds full of resentment, but, the smile on his face is exactly the kind of gratification that comes after being told something about your efforts. Laugh. After experiencing painful suffering, if you say a few words of boasting, human beings will lose themselves and start to indulge in unrealistic fantasies. This is a typical manifestation of the erosion of the soul, Takahashi said. Ding Ding pointed to the side and slowed down his work speed. He eavesdropped on his conversation with Jing-hee, with a disdainful smile on his face. As long as the comic ends with a happy ending in a reasonable way, then Ding Ding Jisang will become a puppet at my disposal, a plaything that can be enslaved at will. Are you really a man to say such a thing? Jing-hee turned to look at Ding Ding, whose face had collapsed, and then turned his head to the side with black lines on his face. I heard it, Cheng. I really heard it. Ding Ding Jisang started repeating the same words with a black face. This is not only a precursor to collapse, but also an attempt to amplify the move. Recharging. Ding Ding Ji-san, do you want to start a war? Makoto Takahashi faced the resentful Tin Ding without fear, and slowly drew out the magic sword. Very good. Compared with those who have practiced 8 leaves Itari style Jingzonghao Jisang, let me see what level of strength you have reached after practicing, Ding Ding Jisang. I still have a comic manuscript to finish. This is not an escape. Ting Ding just chose to avoid the edge very sensibly. Speaking of Phoenix Academy teacher, what is Hakuha Idoryu? Because there are many characters who use swords in the manga manuscript that is being completed recently, Shizuo River has no idea about the character Takahashi Makoto mentioned just now, who he has never been. I am very curious about the genre I have never heard of. It is a kind of swordsmanship that comes with a strong curse. It is said that after practicing this style of swordsmanship, you will be cursed by killing your wife and giving birth to a daughter. Makoto Takahashi squinted his right eye and looked at Jing-hee River. Ryuako, I hope your child will be a daughter in the future, and I strongly recommend you to practice this style of swordsmanship. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 421. Through Yoshida's recommendation, Shizukawa's new comic got the opportunity to be published in the monthly magazine. Then at Yoshida's invitation, Shizukawa followed a certain editor who came to receive the comic manuscript and went to the editorial headquarters of the monthly magazine. Discuss matters related to the serialization of your own comics. Although at the beginning, Shizuohihi did not delay the completion of the manga Clannad because he had to negotiate the serialization of the manga manuscript. Although he agreed with Shizuohihi's diligent and serious work attitude, Takahashi Makoto still regarded it as if you don't go, Ryuze, I will kill you. This dangerous reason successfully persuaded Jinghihi to go to the editor to discuss matters related to comic serialization. However, it is a little regrettable that Jinghihi's comics were not serialized from the next monthly issue. Although for such a rare opportunity, it is definitely exciting news for other people who are working as assistants but have dreams of becoming cartoonists. However, Shizuka, after thinking calmly, met with the monthly editor-in-chief Sasaki. We held a negotiation and proposed to postpone the publication of new comics until after the completion of the comic Clannad. After listening to Jinghi's conditions, Sasaki, the editor-in-chief on the editorial side, expressed his understanding and agreed to this seemingly rude request. After all, judging from the current monthly situation, the comic Clannad has an overwhelming advantage. Even the comic PCP, which had great popularity in weekly magazines and caused many topics, could only barely maintain the status quo despite Ajumenha's best efforts, let alone other comics. No matter how novel Jinghihi's new comic style is, no matter what twists and turns the plot has, if you want to take the comic Clannad head on, there is absolutely no chance of winning. Not only is there a difference in popularity between cartoonists, but more importantly, the current popularity of the comic Clannad is definitely not something that a new serial can shake. Jinghi also doesn't want to start serializing his new comic in the monthly magazine before the comic Clannad is completed. Putting aside the irrational behavior of using his own new comics to compete with monster-level works like the comic Clannad for the moment, Jinghi has not told anyone on the editorial side the real reason why he proposed to postpone the serialization. Because he went to discuss matters related to comic serialization yesterday, Jinghihi's work has not been completed. Out of the assistant's sense of responsibility or for other reasons, Jinghihi came earlier today than to finish it, in order to help his assistant. Before others start working, try to finish the remaining comic drafts from yesterday. Jinghi didn't think that coming to work early in the morning would interfere with Takahashi Makoto's rest. In the previous 3 months, when he and Takahashi Makoto completed the Clannad manga manuscript day and night, Jinghihi has a new understanding of the working attitude of a certain middle-grade cartoonist. But at that time, were they really just finishing the manga manuscript? If you don't finish the manga manuscript, you will die. The meaning of life is to complete the comic manuscript. Even if he transforms into a demon, he must complete the manga manuscript before losing his mind. At that time, Makoto Takahashi probably felt like this to Shizukawa. Putting aside the memory that almost caused a psychological shadow in his mind, Shizuka took a deep breath and knocked on the door of Makoto Takahashi's house. After the door was opened, before Jinghihi could react, someone held his shoulder firmly. And not only the shoulders, the legs used for standing also feel like they are being held on the left and right at the same time. Hey, Ryuze, why don't you agree to the conditions of my familiar cat and start serializing a new comic next month? Why exactly? Jinghihi could tell without even using his eyes that the man who was patting his shoulder hard at this moment was the person is none other than Makoto Takahashi in a white coat. Why, meow, the person hugging his left leg was Takahashi Rin, not only a little lowly with a cute appearance, but under the education of someone's bad taste. Even the way of speaking has begun to use a little kitten-like sound as the ending. 4. The reason for stammering is because you feel a little embarrassed to do such a thing, right? Sure enough, the most normal one is the young Shota Ogata CG. Jing He fell into a sluggish state irresistibly. It's not because a certain second-grade cartoonist used a body-holding technique when he slapped his shoulders hard, or a long-lost secret technique like the legendary sunflower acupuncture hand, but because of the two people hugging his legs. Child. Rin, with her twin tails, blinked her big eyes, and a curious look appeared on her young face, coupled with a sweet smile. The hedgehog-headed Jingji was obviously just a young Shota, but he acted like a troubled adult, coupled with the action of scratching his head. This is what is called cute. Oh, Ryoko, your expression is really interesting. Makoto Takahashi finally stopped slapping Shizukawa's shoulders, picked up Rin, and said with a cheerful expression, sure enough, even Ryoko can't resist true cute killing technique's three-person combat technique. Jing He rubbed the painful shoulder that was slapped by Takahashi Makoto, while looking at Takahashi Makoto with helpless eyes. Judging from someone's excessive daughter control attribute, Takahashi just when Cheng slapped himself on the shoulder, he definitely used force on purpose. Tisk, Ryoko, don't underestimate the power of this combat technique. Makoto Takahashi looked at Siji's pitiful expression of pulling at his trousers, and just touched the little Shota's spiky head in a comforting manner, while being very interested. Ji said to Ryoko, when I was practicing this combination of combat skills last night, even the witch Rina who was the target of the attack fell into a state of being unable to fight in a short period of time. This is not something to be proud of. Also, why do you need to practice such weird combat skills? Teacher from the Phoenix Institute, about my manga. Although he wanted to complain about Makoto Takahashi's practice of such a weird combination of combat skills, Jing He still decided to answer that Makoto Takahashi did not agree to the serialization before complaining. Comic reasons. Things like that are not important. Takahashi Makoto interrupted Shizuka who was about to speak unceremoniously. While teasing Rin in his arms, he said expectantly, hey, wait a minute. When the little animals come, if you use this combat technique, oh, I've already seen the ending. Eh? It's not important? Then, Phoenix Academy teacher, didn't you just ask the reason? Why now, obviously, Jing He said that the thinking circuit of a certain second-grade cartoonist was beyond his understanding. It's just to paralyze you for a moment when you use the combination of combat skills. Although the irresponsible slur of a certain second-grade cartoonist made Jing He feel like he was being perfunctory. Jing He no longer plans to continue talking to Takahashi Makoto, because with Takahashi Makoto's current excited state, if he continues to chat, he will not only continue to be bullied, but it may also affect the manga manuscript later. Complete. Hey, Ryoko, although you haven't told my familiar cat or the commander, why you postponed the serialization of the manga, but... However, Makoto Takahashi did not intend to let Shizukawa go. I was thinking about your postponement. The reason couldn't be as simple as being unable to finish two manga manuscripts at the same time, right? Jing He fell silent. It's not that he still holds grudges about what happened just now. At least as a man, Shizu River is not so petty in terms of temperament. The reason why he is silent is because Shizu River doesn't know how to answer Makoto Takahashi. Is it just like how you treat editors and chief editors, saying some perfunctory words to deceive? If this is really the reason, there is no need for you to postpone the serialization, Ryoko. Makoto Takahashi looked at the silent Shizu River and shook his head silently. By the way, the manga Planet is almost finished. Even if it is if you leave now, I can complete the rest of the plot alone. Not to mention there are slaves like Tintin Jisang and little animals. Ahem, there are other assistants. Or should I tell you the real reason? Oh. A small animal was discovered while sneaking. Rin, Cg, get ready. After seeing Aoi Ueno in the distance from the window, Takahashi Makoto put Rin down in his arms and prepared a combination of combat skills. However, after seeing Shizukawa in a confused and entangled state, Takahashi Makoto said casually, no matter what the reason is, since it is you who completed the manga manuscript, then the person who decides how and when the manga will be serialized must also be you. Speaking of Lyoze, the reason why you want to postpone the serialization is, you don't want to see the comics you created by yourself being beaten and crushed by the comics you participated in, right? Of course not, although he knew that what Makoto Takahashi said was not wrong. Shizukawa, whose face was full of black lines, said that the reason for delaying the serialization of the comic was definitely not for this reason. But because when I helped Mr. Phoenix Academy complete the comic draft of Clannad, whether it was dealing with the light and dark of the comic background, or the description of the characters' expressions, or even the perception of life, I have gained a lot. If the monthly magazine serializes my new comic from the next issue, it means that I will have to face off against the comic Clannad, this comic that I participated in, this comic that changed my life. Not just because I don't have the confidence to compete with the comic Clannad. It's not just because I don't have the strength to challenge the Phoenix Academy teacher. But I don't want to use my poor work to fight against the comic Clannad. What's more, right now, I am not qualified to challenge the Phoenix Academy teachers head-on. This is the real reason why Jing He asked to postpone the serialization of his comics. Unfortunately, for Shizukawa, who is not good at words, if he wants to say this directly to Takahashi Makoto, it is basically an impossible task by visual inspection. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 422. Chapter 422 Uncle Ding Ding's Doubts and Melancholy. Oh, it's really effective. It's worth it that I could practice last night and reach the maximum level of skill proficiency. Takahashi Makoto, who was completing the comic manuscript, put down the brush and sighed to a young lady who was blushing because of anger and shyness. When I experimented on Lyoze before, it didn't achieve the expected effect, and I was a little worried, but judging from the performance of the little animal just now, the effect is better than I expected. But, damn it! The hand holding the brush unconsciously used strength. At this moment, Ueno Aoi really wanted to use the brush in her hand as a hidden weapon to kill the middle school cartoonist who was teasing her. However, considering the degree of violation of the white coat cartoonist in terms of force, Miss Ueno Aoi could only complain in a low voice at most. Time goes back a little, back to the time when Miss Ueno Aoi just came. Rin and CG directly hugged the thigh and launched a cute attack, causing Miss Ueno Aoi, who came in defenselessly, to fall into a state of stiffness in an instant, and the crazy Takahashi Makoto instigated the two children to use the skills of acting cute that only children can perform, and launched a second attack on Miss Ueno Aoi who was in a state of stiffness. As a result, Miss Ueno Aoi couldn't fight even before Takahashi Makoto delivered the final fatal blow. After Jinghe River performed the resuscitation technique, Miss Ueno Aoi, who recovered her fighting ability, did not immediately enter the revenge ghost mode and fight fiercely with Takahashi Makoto. Instead, she proposed to a certain Chuyuni cartoonist that she wanted to take Rin and CG home. Cuteness is justice indeed. Let's not talk about Miss Ueno Aoi who was complaining and cursing a certain middle school cartoonist while completing the comic manuscript. Tintin, who was in charge of completing the finale of the comic Clannad, suddenly shouted in surprise while flipping through the comic manuscript. The reason is naturally because of the extraordinary development of the comic Clannad. Eleven's illness is getting worse and worse, and she has even reached the point where she can't go to kindergarten and can only lie in bed to rest, and Okazaki Tomoya has even quit his job in order to take good care of 11. These contents are the comic plots that Tintin completed before, and they are also the culprits that caused Tintin to not sleep well for a long time after completing it. Although Makoto Takahashi has told everyone on the assistant side more than once that the end of the comic Clannad will end with a happy ending that makes everyone happy, but, since completing the scene of 11 falling in the snow, Tintin has completely stopped believing what Makoto Takahashi said before. To be honest, Tintin has always suspected that the reason why Makoto Takahashi deliberately said such words in front of his assistants was probably to let himself and others, as assistants, keep a glimmer of hope for the ending of the comic clannad. When all the assistants listened to the deception of a certain middle school cartoonist and looked forward to the happy ending, a certain white coat whose bad taste had risen to the level of ghostly beast suddenly made an extremely cruel and heartbreaking ending. Observing the expressions and reactions of humans from full of hope to full of endless despair, but that is the supreme pleasure that makes my soul tremble. If you follow the daily behavior habits of a certain middle school cartoonist, after thinking like this, Tintin thinks that this may be the real purpose of Makoto Takahashi's words. It's not that Uncle Tintin thinks too much, but because Makoto Takahashi, a cartoonist named Hauer Kyoma, is such a person with bad taste. For example, the plot is stuck at a critical moment, so that the curious readers have to wait patiently for the next episode while gritting their teeth. For example, the readers are trapped by the magic twist of the comics. As Takahashi Makoto's assistant, Ding Ding has participated in such actions many times. Although Takahashi Makoto, the mastermind, said that he enjoyed the various reactions of the readers, Uncle Ding Ding, as an accomplice, said that he was under a lot of pressure. Thinking of this, Uncle Ding Ding secretly took a peek. Miss Wenoawi, who was rubbing her face against the comic manuscript with a happy smile on her face, had a twitch at the corner of her mouth. It is obvious that the object of Takahashi Makoto's recent getting pleasure behavior is no longer limited to the readers. The crazy middle school cartoonist has expanded his hunting range to the assistant side. Let Miss Wenoawi always be responsible for the rare happy daily plots in the comic clannad. If she finishes the work of the comic clannad, she will help Mayuri complete the comic manuscript of Dream Eater. At the same time, Wenoawi is prohibited from touching the heartbreaking plots in clannad, and other people on the assistant side are prohibited from revealing any subsequent plots of the comic clannad to Wenoawi. So imagine that Wenoawi, who has been immersed in the plot of Xifen playing in the comic clannad, who has always felt that the comic clannad is full of humor and joy in the later period, suddenly saw the plot serialized in the monthly magazine, and saw that Eleven's body was getting worse day by day, and even fell in the snow in the end. What kind of loving expression would she show? When Makoto Takahashi deliberately created this kind of malicious contrast for Wenoawi, the evil taste of the devil from the depths of his soul, Tintin said that he could totally feel it. But when thinking about this aspect, while Tintin felt extremely sympathetic to Miss Aoi Weno, he also felt a trace of envy. If Wenoawi has been responsible for the happy daily parts because of someone's bad taste, then Uncle Tintin has also been responsible for completing the most sadistic plot because of someone's evil taste. For Okazaki Tomoya, if Furukawa Nagisa, who redeemed his life and started his own happy life, passed away, it would be an unbearable trauma. Then the daughter who has become the only spiritual support in Okazaki Tomoya's life, the one who made him realize Shio, who has the responsibility of being a father, and his body is getting worse day by day, will undoubtedly be the final blow to destroy Okazaki Tomoya's life. From the moment 11 fell ill to the time 11 finally lay in the snow and never got up, Ding Ding was constantly suffering physically and mentally during the process of completing the comic manuscript. It was Nagisa Furukawa who made Tomoya Okazaki, who had been lonely, feel the warmth of home. It was Nagisa Furukawa who made Tomoya Okazaki, who had despaired of life, see hope again. It was Nagisa Furukawa who made Tomoya Okazaki, who was originally confused and uneasy about the future, find happiness. However, the man who changed and redeemed Okazaki Tomoya passed away after leaving behind a daughter. It was Shio who made Tomoya Okazaki, who could not get rid of the pain of the death of his beloved, pick himself up from the depression. It was Shio who made Tomoya Okazaki, who had only known how to escape, realize the responsibility of being a father for the first time, and not only forgave himself, his father no longer ran away. It was Shio who made Okazaki Tomoya, who had been living like a walking corpse, wake up again. However, this person who became Okazaki Tomoya's spiritual support. After Furukawa Nagisa became Okazaki Tomoya's spiritual support after Okazaki Tomoya learned to cherish. Going to leave. Although your job as an assistant is to assist the cartoonist in completing the manga manuscript, you should not have any prejudices about the plot of the manga, but this time, after finishing the manga manuscript in which 11 fell in the snow, Uncle Tintin is prejudiced against the comic Clannad. After the death of his beloved wife, the daughter who was the only one to support him in his life was also about to leave. While giving people hope, they also gave him double the despair. There is nothing more cruel than this kind of ups and downs in development. Okay. Good. Whether it is for Tomoya Okazaki in the comic or for Tintin who has completed the comic manuscript, this part of the plot in the recent period is really too cruel. The comic manuscripts to be completed today are still piled up on the table as usual, although the plot completed during this period has made Uncle Tintin very entangled and depressed, but as a qualified assistant, the work that should be completed must still be completed. According to his past habits, Uncle Tintin began to quickly flip through the comic manuscript before finishing it, and then... This is how the comic turned out in the end. This unfolding is too. Ding Ding rubbed his eyes and repeatedly flipped through the pages of the comic in his hand, seeming quite surprised by the unfolding of the plot in the comic. This comic draft starts from the scene where 11 falls in the snow. There is such an emotional scene at the beginning. After Uncle Ding Ding expressed that he was a little depressed, he suppressed his feelings. Mixed emotions, keep reading. The plot of the comic suddenly jumped from Okazaki Tomo, who also fell in the snow, to the scene at the beginning of the entire comic. Okazaki Tomoya, wearing a student uniform, was walking on the cherry blossom path leading to the school and met the man with his eyes closed. A girl who cheers and encourages herself by speaking strange words. If I hadn't stopped her at that time, maybe so many things wouldn't have happened later. When Furukawa Nagisa passed away, Okazaki Tomoya once thought this way. If it hadn't been for the day when the cherry blossoms fell, he wouldn't have been there. If Nagisa Furukawa is called to a halt, maybe so many sad things won't happen in the future. Nagisa, but this time, facing the same scene, Okazaki Tomoya loudly called out to Furukawa Nagisa, who was walking forward. At the same time, he rushed forward excitedly and hugged the confused Furukawa Nagisa. Nagisa. I'm here. Tomoya-kun, that's great for calling me. Compared to Okazaki Tomoya, who was overly excited, Nagisa Furukawa still had that warm smile on his face as usual. It would have been better if he hadn't met me. I thought my friend would feel this way, so I was very uneasy. Nagisa. It's great that I can meet Tomoya-kun, I feel very happy. So please don't be confused anymore. No matter what happens in the future, please don't regret meeting me. If the plot twist here is too sudden, then Tintin, who turned to the next page of the comic manuscript, said that he saw an even more magical plot. Okazaki Tomoya, who was hugging Nagisa Furukawa just now, came to his senses, but he went back to the day when Chio was born. The only difference was that Nagisa Furukawa lying on the bed was not the same as before forever. His eyes closed, but he smiled, comforting Okazaki Tomoya, who looked anxious. Are we together now? Okazaki Tomoya held Nagisa Furukawa's hand tightly and asked with a confused look on his face. We will always be together, haven't I always said this to Tomoya-kun? Now, Cheng, are you sure you're not mistaken? Why? Uncle Ding Ding held the half-read comic manuscript and walked to Takahashi Cheng with a confused look on his face. This development feels a bit... Didn't I say that before? The manga Clannad will end with a happy ending, Takahashi Makoto said as if it was a matter of course, which made Tintin frown. Yes, it is indeed a happy ending. But this development is too weird, isn't it? Are you dissatisfied? Tintin-ji-san, you can't be too greedy. Takahashi Makoto pointed to the manga he was completing on the table and said with disdain, and Tintin-ji-san, although the manga in your hand is indeed the content of the final chapter of Clannad, but who told you that the manga in your hand is the entire content of the final chapter? Stupid human, the key content of the final chapter of the manga Clannad is still here with me. Can I kill this smiling middle school cartoonist in front of me? At this moment, Uncle Tintin was melancholy.